Censorship and purges are of course not new to Korea. In the past you couldn't speak ill against the king or the emperor, but in the 15th and 16th century the king purged a great number of intellectuals and in particular historians. But to explain Korea at the time a little bit, you had three officers within the Korean court: the Inspector General, the Censor, and the Special Advisors, and it was their role to sort of keep the king and the ministers in line. And in fact, the Special Advisors would sometimes hold history lessons with the king. In the 15th century, under King Seongjong, this group of intellectuals expanded a great deal. In fact, the king brought in many Confucian scholars into the Korean court and expanded the royal library, but as they grew in power, they entered into a feud with the landed aristocracy and ministers. But King Seongjong died in 1494 and was replaced by his son. His son, King Seongjong, I'm probably saying that badly, was a lot more erratic than his father, and when he took the throne, a historian named Kim Jong-jik wrote a piece sort of criticizing how King Sejong had usurped the throne a few decades earlier. Now, because he had inherited the throne through the line from King Sejong, this put into question his legitimacy as the ruler. Of course, he was angry by this and decided to lash out against the faction of scholars by executing many of them. And in fact, he also turned the Hall of Study into a pleasure ground. But the faction still remained, and it was still pretty influential. But a decade later, the king found out that his mother was not in fact his real mother. His biological mother had been murdered, I think by poisoning. So once again he lashed out and killed the scholars again. In fact, he killed some of his father's old concubines. But a couple years later, his sort of erratic rule and temperament got him deposed. He was replaced by his half-brother Jung Jong, and initially an advisor named Jo Gwang-jo essentially ruled the country. Now, he was a scholar and he ran the country very effectively, and people in fact very fearful to take bribes, but this angered the ministers and landed classes, so they hatched a plan to remove Jo from power. What they did is they wrote on a leaf with honey, "Jo will be king." The king found this and thought it was a supernatural sign, so he had Jo killed, as well as a lot of scholars once again. Seongjong eventually died in the 1540s and was replaced by his son Ingjong, but Ingjong died within a few months and he was replaced by his half-brother Myeongjong. Now, they didn't have the same mothers, but Myeongjong was only 12 at the time, so Ingjong's uncles fought a sort of political battle with Myeongjong's uncles, and this tore the country up, or at least the Korean court up, and again the scholars were in the centre of it and many of them were purged. The Surim, this faction of intellectuals, fled after this, the fourth literati purge, and they fled to the countryside mainly, but within a few decades they found their way back into the Korean court and were influential once again. But over time there were other purges throughout the centuries, and they were often just caught in the middle of factional struggles. But they're interesting to read about because it shows how the Joseon government worked. It shows how factions drove policy and chose kings.